The sound of my granddaughter's trembling voice still haunts me. Last night, she slipped a crumpled note into my hand under the dinner table. It said, "Grandpa, please look under the sailboat in the garage. You'll understand everything." When I went down there at midnight and saw what she meant, I screamed so loud I thought my heart would stop. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. The clinking of expensive silverware against fine china echoed through our dining room like gunshots. I kept my eyes down, trying to cut through the tasteless vegan loaf on my plate, but really I was watching. I've been a structural engineer for 42 years, building bridges all across Pennsylvania, and I know how to spot a crack in the foundation before everything comes crashing down. Right now, I was staring at the fractures of my own family. Across that mahogany table sat my boy, Daniel. He's only 42, but tonight he looked ancient. His skin had this yellowish tint like old newspaper, and his hands, the same hands that used to throw perfect spirals on a football field, they were shaking so badly he could barely lift his water glass. This wasn't a successful architect who ran his own firm anymore. This was a man disappearing, fading away pixel by pixel. Next to him sat Victoria, his wife, my daughter-in-law. She was practically glowing. Her skin was flush with health, her eyes sharp and predatory like a hawk circling its prey. She wore this silk dress that probably cost more than my first car, and she had that tight, practiced smile she uses in her online wellness videos where she tells desperate women how to manifest abundance while spending my son's money. "Eat up, Sophie," Victoria said, her voice dripping like honey masking poison. "It's a special vitamin blend I made just for you. It'll help cleanse your system of toxins." I watched my 10-year-old granddaughter stare down at the bowl in front of her. The liquid was thick, murky green sludge that smelled like pond water mixed with chemicals. Sophie wasn't just hesitant. She was terrified. Her tiny shoulders were hunched up toward her ears, and she was gripping the table edge so hard her knuckles went white. She looked at that green soup, then shot a desperate glance at her father. "Daddy, I don't want it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It tastes like it's burning." Daniel blinked slowly, like he was trying to process the words through thick fog. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, this wet, rattling cough erupted from his chest. It was horrible. I've supervised tunnel construction for 23 years, and I know what fluid in the lungs sounds like. It sounded like drowning. That wasn't a cold, and it wasn't stress like the doctors kept claiming. That was the sound of a body shutting down. Victoria didn't even glance at her husband as he hacked and wheezed into his napkin. She just reached out and tapped one long manicured fingernail on the rim of Sophie's bowl. "Don't be difficult, Sophie," she said, and the sweetness in her voice dropped several degrees. "We don't want to upset Daddy, do we? Look at him. He's so exhausted. If you don't drink your wellness soup, Daddy might get worse. You don't want that on your conscience, do you, sweetie?" That was it. The manipulation was so sharp and cruel, I felt my blood pressure spike. I gripped my steak knife tighter. I wanted to slam my fist on the table. I wanted to shout that I paid for this house. I paid for the car in the driveway. I paid for the food on this table. So nobody tells my granddaughter to drink poison. But I forced myself to release my grip. I took a deep breath. I had to be smart. Since I moved in here 4 months ago after my minor stroke, Victoria has been painting me as a senile old man. If I exploded now, she'd use it as proof that I was losing my mind. She'd pack me off to a nursing home before sunrise. And then who would protect Sophie? Who would save Daniel? So I played the part. I let my hand shake a little as I reached for my wine. I kept my mouth shut, but I was watching. I was recording every single detail in my mind, just like I used to record load-bearing data on site inspections. Daniel finally stopped coughing. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, and I saw a speck of pink blood on the white linen before he crumpled it up in his fist. "Just drink it, princess," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel. "Listen to your mother. She knows what's best." Sophie looked at her father, and I saw the light go out of her eyes. She realized no help was coming from that side of the table. She picked up her spoon with a trembling hand. Victoria smiled, satisfied. Good girl, she purred. Then she stood up, smoothing down her expensive dress. I'm going to the kitchen to get the organic fruit tart for dessert. Nobody move. I want this to be a perfect family dinner. As soon as the kitchen door clicked shut, the atmosphere changed. The air pressure seemed to drop. Sophie dropped her spoon into the bowl with a splash. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at her father. She slid off her chair and crawled under that huge dining table. Sophie, what are you doing? Daniel mumbled, his head lolling back against the chair. Get up. I dropped my napkin on the floor. Whoops. Clumsy old hands, I said loudly for anyone listening. I reached down to get it, and that's when I felt it. A small, cold hand grabbed my ankle. I froze. Sophie was huddled under the table by my feet. Her eyes were wide and filled with terror that no 10-year-old should ever know. She didn't say a word. She just pressed a small ball of crumpled paper against my sock, tucking it deep inside. Then she whispered so softly I almost missed it. Don't let her see, Grandpa. Please. She scrambled out from under the table and was back in her seat just as the kitchen door swung open. Victoria breezed in, carrying a silver platter of fruit. Why is everyone so quiet? She asked, scanning the room with those shark-like eyes. Nothing, dear, Daniel mumbled. Just waiting for you. I could feel the piece of paper burning against my ankle. It felt heavy like a lead weight. I needed to read it, but I couldn't do it here. Not with Victoria watching every move like a hawk circling a field mouse. I waited 5 agonizing minutes. I forced myself to eat a slice of the tart, which tasted like cardboard and pretension. Finally, I pushed my chair back. I need to use the restroom, I said, making my voice sound weak and wavering. Old bladder, you know. Victoria looked at me with a flash of annoyance, but she nodded. Make it quick, Walter. We're going to watch a movie together. Family time. I shuffled out of the room, leaning heavily on my cane, even though my legs are stronger than they look. As soon as I turned the corner into the hallway, I straightened up. I moved silently across the expensive hardwood floors to the guest bathroom near the foyer. I went inside and locked the door. Then I turned on the faucet, full blast to mask any sound. My hands were shaking, not from age but from pure adrenaline. I sat on the closed toilet lid and reached down to my sock. I pulled out the crumpled note. It was torn from a page of her homework notebook. The handwriting was hurried and jagged, written with a heavy hand, as if she was afraid the pencil would break. I smoothed it out on my knee. Grandpa, save Dad. Look under Mom's sailboat in the garage. Don't let her see. I stared at the words. The sailboat. The Lady V. That's what Victoria called a 26-foot racing yacht sitting in our 3-car garage. It was a sleek white fiberglass beauty that cost $90,000. Daniel had bought it for her 3 years ago for their anniversary. But here's the thing. I'm a boat guy. I grew up on Lake Erie. I know boats, and I know that the Lady V hasn't touched water in 20 months. The registration sticker on the hull expired last year. Every time I asked about taking it out for a sail, Victoria would make an excuse. She'd say the rigging needed adjustment, or the trailer had a flat tire, or the weather wasn't right. I always thought it was just laziness. I thought it was just another expensive toy she got bored with. But Sophie's note changed everything. Look under the sailboat. I stood up and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at me had gray hair and wrinkles carved deep by 73 years of hard work and Pennsylvania winters. But the eyes were the same eyes that had stared down union bosses and corrupt inspectors. They were the eyes of a man who doesn't back down when the job gets dangerous. My son was dying in that dining room. My granddaughter was living in terror. And the answer was sitting in the garage under a layer of dust and lies. I turned off the faucet. The silence in the bathroom was deafening. I flushed the toilet just for show. I wasn't going to watch that movie. I was going to wait. I was going to wait until the house was asleep, until the only sound was the wind off the lake, and then I was going to go down to that garage. I folded the note and put it in my shirt pocket, right over my heart. If Victoria thought I was just a useless old man, she was about to learn a very painful lesson. You don't build skyscrapers by being soft, and you don't protect your family by playing nice. I unlocked the door and stepped back out into the hallway. The game was on, and for the first time in months, I felt alive. I wasn't just a guest in this house anymore. I was the inspector, and I was about to find the rot in the foundation. What I found under that boat would make me question everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law. The truth was darker than anything I could have imagined. I waited until the digital clock on the microwave read 2 a.m. The house was silent, but it wasn't peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb waiting for its next occupant. I slipped out of the guest room, my socks sliding on the cold hardwood floor. I didn't take my cane, because the rhythmic tapping would echo through the hallway like a drum. I needed to move like the soldier I once was, not the grandfather they thought I'd become. My hip ached with every step, a sharp reminder of my age, but I pushed the pain down. Pain was just information, and right now I had more important data to collect. I reached the door to the garage and turned the handle with agonizing slowness. The mechanism clicked softly, barely louder than a heartbeat. I held my breath, waiting for a reaction from upstairs. Nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator and the wind rattling the window panes. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The garage was colder than the rest of the house. The smell hit me instantly. It was a mix of stale gasoline, old rubber, and dust. But underneath it all was this faint chemical scent, sharp and acrid, that didn't belong in a residential garage. I tapped the button on my small pen light, keeping the beam low to the ground. There it was, the Lady V, $90,000 of white fiberglass and ego sitting on a trailer that looked like it hadn't moved since the day it was bought. In the harsh shadows cast by my flashlight, the sailboat looked like a beach whale. I walked around the perimeter, my eyes scanning every inch. Victoria claimed this was her hobby, her escape, but the layer of gray dust on the cover told a different story. I ran a finger along the keel. Pristine, no scratches, no dings from docks, no watermarks. This boat had never seen a lake. It was a prop, a giant expensive stage prop taking up 2/3 of the garage. But I wasn't here to critique her spending habits. I was here to find what was underneath. I knelt down beside the trailer wheels, my knees popping loudly in the quiet space. I winced but kept moving. I crawled under hull, the smell of rubber and grease filling my nose. I shone the light on the concrete floor. To an untrained eye, it was just a garage floor, stained with oil, marked with tire treads. But I'm not an untrained eye. I spent 42 years inspecting bridges and foundations. I know concrete. I know how it cures, how it cracks, and how it looks when someone tries to hide a modification. The concrete directly beneath the center of the boat was different. The texture was slightly smoother than the surrounding area. I brushed away a pile of dead leaves and dirt. There it was, a hairline fracture running, in a perfect rectangle about 5 feet wide. It wasn't a crack from settling. It was a cut. Someone had sawed through the slab and put it back together. I leaned in closer, my nose almost touching the cold ground. The gap was sealed with this translucent gray substance. I touched it with my fingernail. It was hard as rock, but had a slight give. Epoxy resin, and not the stuff you buy at the local hardware store to fix a broken vase. This was industrial-grade structural epoxy, the kind used to bond steel supports in high-rise buildings. It requires mixing precise ratios of hardener and resin. It requires temperature control to cure properly. Victoria, the woman who once called me in a panic because she didn't know how to reset the circuit breaker, had apparently managed to execute a professional-grade concrete excavation and sealing job. The absurdity of it made my stomach turn. This wasn't just a hiding spot. This was a fortress. I crawled deeper, moving toward the center of the rectangle. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. If my theory was right, there had to be a way in. A mechanism. A latch. I found it near the axle of the trailer. It was ingenious, really. A small flush-mounted ring handle, painted the exact same shade of gray as the concrete. It was tucked away in the shadow of the boat's hull, completely invisible unless you were lying on your stomach directly underneath it. My hand trembled as I reached out. The metal of the ring was cold. I hooked my finger through it. This was it. The truth Sophie had promised me. The answer to why my son was dying. I took a deep breath, bracing myself to pull. Dad, what are you doing? The voice didn't come from upstairs. It came from right behind me. I didn't scream. The sound died in my throat, turning into a dry choke. I froze, my fingers still hooked through the metal ring. For a second, I considered pulling it anyway, considered ripping the door open and exposing whatever hell was down there. But logic took over. If I opened it now, I'd have no leverage. I'd just be an old man trapped under a boat with a secret he couldn't explain. I slowly released the ring. I rolled over onto my back and looked out from under the trailer. Victoria was standing in the doorway connecting the garage to the kitchen. The light from the kitchen spilled around her, creating a silhouette that looked less like a woman and more like a looming shadow. She flicked the garage light switch, and the overhead fluorescence buzzed to life, blinding me for a moment. She was wearing a long silk robe that shimmered under the harsh lights. Her feet were bare. In her right hand, she held a small curved paring knife. In her left, she held a pristine green apple. She wasn't looking at me with anger. She wasn't panicking. She was looking at me with this calm, detached amusement that was infinitely more terrifying than rage. I scrambled backward, dragging myself out from under the boat. My hips screamed in protest, and I hit my head on the trailer hitch. I grunted in pain, clutching my skull. Victoria didn't move to help me. She just stood there, turning the apple in her hand, peeling a long strip of skin with the knife. The sound of the blade cutting through the crisp fruit was the only sound in the room. I dropped a quarter. I stammered. It was the most pathetic lie I'd ever told. I sounded exactly like the senile old fool she wanted me to be. Victoria laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound like wind chimes in a graveyard. She took a bite of the apple, chewing slowly while she watched me struggle to my feet. "Oh, Walter," she said, shaking her head. "You're getting worse, aren't you? Dr. Morrison warned us about this. The sundowning, the confusion, wandering around at night, looking for loose change under a boat. It's heartbreaking, really." She took a step closer, the knife pointing casually in my direction. I dusted off my pajamas, tried to regain some shred of dignity. "I'm not confused, Victoria. I know what I saw. The floor, it's been cut." Her smile didn't falter. In fact, it widened, showing perfect white teeth. "Of course it's been cut, silly. That's the surprise." "Surprise?" I asked, leaning against the boat for support. My heart was still racing so fast, I thought I might go into cardiac arrest right there. "Yes, the surprise for Daniel," she said, gesturing toward the hidden hatch with the tip of her knife. "I had a wine cellar installed last month. Climate-controlled underground storage for his vintage collection. I wanted to unveil it on his birthday next week. I hired a specialized team to do it while you were at your checkups. I wanted it to be perfect." She looked me dead in the eye. "But you just had to go snooping, didn't you? You just had to ruin the surprise." I stared at her. A wine cellar, under a sailboat, in a garage, sealed with industrial epoxy. It was a lie, a massive, glaring lie. You don't store wine under a gasoline-powered vehicle. You don't seal a wine cellar with permanent structural adhesive. And you certainly don't access it by crawling on your belly under a trailer. But the way she said it was so smooth, so practiced, that for a split second I felt the ground shift. Was I wrong? Was I just a paranoid old man reading too much into a construction detail? No. I smelled the chemicals. I saw Sophie's fear. But I couldn't prove it. "Not yet." "I see," I said, keeping my voice level. "A wine cellar. That explains the smell." "Exactly," she said, snapping the knife shut against the apple core. "Now, let's get you back to bed, Walter. You look exhausted, and you miss your evening dose of the memory supplements Dr. Morrison prescribed. We can't have you wandering around imagining conspiracies, can we?" She stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. It was an invitation, but it felt like a threat. "Next time you come down here, be careful," she whispered as I walked past her. "The floor can be slippery. People have accidents in garages all the time. Falls, sharp tools, carbon monoxide. It would be a tragedy if something happened to you so soon after moving in." I stopped and looked at her. Her eyes were flat and dead, like a shark's. "I'll be careful," I said, gripping the doorframe. I'm very sure-footed for my age. I walked back into the hallway, feeling her eyes boring into my back. I didn't go to my room. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the shower to cover the sound of my breathing. I looked at my hands. They were covered in gray dust from the garage floor. Evidence. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd scare me off with her knife and her gaslighting. She thought I was going to swallow the pill of being the crazy old grandpa. But she made a mistake. She told me it was a wine cellar. She gave me plausible deniability. She thought I would accept it and go to sleep. She forgot one thing. I built the Keystone Bridge over the Susquehanna River. I know the difference between a load-bearing structure and a facade. And I know that you don't guard a wine cellar with a knife at 2 a.m. I washed the dust off my hands, watching the gray water swirl down the drain. The sailboat wasn't just a boat. It was a coffin, and I was the only one who had the crowbar to pry it open. I needed to see the money. If she was building secret bunkers, she was paying for it somehow. And Daniel sure as hell didn't sign the checks for a project he didn't know about. Tomorrow, I would stop being the engineer and start being the auditor. If I couldn't break the concrete, I would follow the paper trail. And I had a feeling that trail was going to lead to something much darker than a vintage Pinot Noir. But first, I needed to get inside that company, inside those files, before she realized I was on to her. The clock was ticking, and I had no idea how little time Daniel had left. The sun came up over the lake looking like a bruised peach, but I didn't have time to admire the view. I was sitting at the kitchen table, forcing down a bowl of watery oatmeal while Victoria watched me from the island. She was blending a green smoothie, the noise of the machine tearing through the silence like a chainsaw. I smiled at her. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I had to channel every ounce of patience I learned from waiting for a concrete to cure in sub-zero temperatures. "That wine cellar is going to be magnificent, Vicky," I said, wiping my mouth with a napkin. "I'm sorry I spooked you last night. Old habits. I always inspect the perimeter." Victoria turned off the blender. She poured the sludge into a glass and gave me that pitying smile again, the one that made me want to put my fist through the granite countertop. "It's okay, Walter," she cooed. "I know the transition has been hard on you. Just stay out of the garage, okay? We don't want you tripping over construction materials." I nodded vigorously, playing the bobblehead doll. "I'm going to head into town today. Going to meet old Jerry from the union. We're going to play some chess at the park. Get out of your hair for a bit." Her eyes lit up. "Perfect. That sounds lovely. Take your time. Daniel is having a resting day. So the house needs to be quiet anyway." A resting day. That was her code for keeping him sedated. My stomach tightened, but I kept the smile plastered on my face. I grabbed my cane and shuffled out the door. The moment the Uber turned the corner and the house was out of sight, I dropped the act. I pulled out my phone and changed the destination. "Take me to the financial district," I told the driver, "and step on it." 25 minutes later, I was standing in front of a glass and steel building that housed Carson and Associates Architecture. I stood there for a moment, looking at the name on the directory. I remembered the day Daniel opened this place. He was so proud. He wanted to build sustainable housing. He wanted to change the skyline. Now the lobby felt cold and impersonal. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The receptionist was new, a young girl with bright pink nails who didn't know who I was. She tried to stop me, but I walked right past her desk with the authority of a man who owns the building, because technically my name was still on the original lease guarantee. I went straight to the back office. Margaret was there. She's been Daniel's executive assistant for 17 years. She was the one who sent flowers when my wife died. She was the one who remembered every birthday, every anniversary. When she saw me, she didn't say hello. She burst into tears. "Oh, Mr. Carson," she sobbed, standing up and rushing around her desk to hug me. "Thank God you're here. I've been leaving messages on Daniel's voicemail for weeks, but he never calls back." "He can't call back, Margaret," I said grimly, gently pulling away. "He's being handled. That's why I'm here. I need to see the books." Margaret hesitated. looking at the closed door of Daniel's office. "I could get fired," she whispered. "Victoria sent a memo. She said no one is allowed to access the financials without her written approval." I looked at her. Margaret, who built this company with Daniel, who built it with me in the background. "Margaret," I said, my voice low and hard, "if you don't show me those books, there won't be a company to get fired from. My son is dying, and I think his bank account is killing him." She went pale. Without another word, she walked to the filing cabinet. She unlocked the bottom drawer with a key she kept on a chain around her neck. She pulled out a thick binder and slammed it on the desk. "Look at the transfers," she said, her voice trembling. "It started 8 months ago. Small amounts at first. Consulting fees, lifestyle management. Then last month, she came in with power of attorney." I opened the binder. My eyes scanned the columns of numbers. I've reviewed budget reports for billion-dollar suspension bridges, so I know how to spot a leak. This wasn't a leak. This was a hemorrhage. On the 18th of last month, Daniel signed a document transferring 85% of his voting shares in the firm to a non-profit organization called VLife Foundation. "VLife," I read aloud. "What is this?" Margaret tapped the document. "It's a charitable foundation. Victoria is the sole director. She told Daniel it was for tax optimization. She said if they moved the assets to the foundation, they could save millions in state taxes and protect the money for Sophie." I laughed, a harsh, dry bark of a laugh. Tax optimization. It was the oldest trick in the book. You move the assets to a charity you control. Then you pay yourself a massive salary as a director and charge all your expenses to the foundation. It was legal theft, but that wasn't the worst part. I flipped to the operating expenses. The company accounts were being drained. "Where's the cash going, Margaret?" I asked, pointing to a wire transfer of $250,000. Margaret shook her head. "I don't know." She listed it as facility upgrades for the home office. I closed the binder. I had seen enough here. She had stolen his company. She had stripped him of his power. But stealing a company doesn't require a secret hatch in the garage. There was something else. I stood up. "Keep a copy of everything, Margaret. Put it on a flash drive and take it home. Do not leave it here." I walked out of the office, leaving her terrified but resolute. I needed to dig deeper. I sat on a bench outside the building and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. First National Bank, Executive Services. The voice on the other end was smooth as silk. It was Robert Henderson, the regional manager. I was the one who gave Robert his first loan when he was starting out. I was the one who vouched for him when he needed a mortgage. "Robert," I said, skipping the pleasantries, "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it off the record." "Walter, you know I can't violate privacy laws," Robert started. "Robert," I cut him off. "My son is in trouble. Real trouble. I'm looking at his corporate accounts, and they're bleeding out. I need to know about his personal 401k and his liquid savings. I'm the beneficiary on those accounts if he dies, so technically I have an interest." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear Robert typing. "Walter," he said quietly, "the 401k is gone." "Gone," I repeated. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "What do you mean gone?" "That account had nearly $2.3 million in it. Liquidated." Robert said, 4 weeks ago. He paid the early withdrawal penalty and took it all in cash. "And where did it go, Robert?" More typing. Then a pause that lasted so long I thought the line had gone dead. "Walter, this is strange. The funds were wired to 3 different holding companies. One is a medical supply importer in Mexico. One is a chemical distributor in New Jersey. And the third is a specialized equipment manufacturer in Germany." "What kind of equipment?" I asked, my hand gripping the phone so hard the plastic creaked. "Centrifuges," Robert whispered, "and industrial-grade refrigeration units. The kind used for biological preservation." I felt the blood drain from my face. "And the chemicals?" "Formaldehyde, and something called dioxin precursors." "Walter, what is Daniel doing? Is he running a lab?" I closed my eyes. The smell in the garage. The cut concrete. The sailboat that never moved. No, Robert, I said, my voice sounding hollow. He's not running a lab. He's an experiment. I hung up the phone. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't just greed. Greed is simple. Greed is buying a boat or a diamond ring. This was insanity. She was buying chemicals to embalm him. She was buying drugs to stop his heart. And she was doing it with his own retirement money. She wasn't just killing him. She was processing him. I sat there on the bench, surrounded by people rushing to lunch, laughing, talking on their phones. They had no idea that a monster was living in that big house by the lake. A monster who did yoga and drank green smoothies. I stood up. I had to go to the police. I had to tell them about the money, the chemicals, everything. But then I stopped. What did I actually have? I had a legal share transfer signed by my son. I had legal purchases of equipment that could be explained away as investment for a new business venture. If I went to the police now, Victoria would produce the paperwork. She would say Daniel was starting a biotech startup. She would say I was confused. And while the police were investigating, while they were looking at spreadsheets, Daniel would be at home, alone with her. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Sophie. I stared at the screen, and my heart stopped. Daddy passed out again. Mom is locking the bedroom door. She has the silver case, the one with the needles. Grandpa, please come home. I didn't think. I didn't plan. The engineer in me vanished, and the father took over. I ran to the curb and waved down a taxi. I didn't care about the cost. I didn't care about the speed limit. Drive. I roared at the driver. Drive like your life depends on it. Because my son's life did. I looked out the window as the city blurred past. The financial autopsy was over. The numbers had told their story. Daniel was worth more dead than alive to her. And the liquidation date was fast approaching. I checked my watch. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I had hours, maybe minutes, before the needle in that silver case found a vein. Hang on, Daniel, I whispered to Glass. Hang on, son. The old man is coming, and I'm bringing hell with me. When I burst through that door, what I saw made me realize I was already too late. Or was I? I burst through the front door of the house, my chest heaving, not from the exertion, but from the sheer panic that had been building in my gut for the last 25 minutes. The house was quiet, too quiet. It had that heavy, suffocating stillness of funeral home where people speak in hushed tones and walk on tiptoes. I didn't take off my shoes. I didn't care about the mud I was tracking onto the pristine, imported marble floors. I marched straight up the stairs, gripping the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. The door to the master bedroom was slightly ajar. I could hear low voices inside. One was the smooth, oily baritone of Dr. Morrison, and the other was the soft, cooing tone Victoria used when she was pretending to be a saint. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled terrible. It was a mix of lavender air freshener and the unmistakable metallic tang of sickness. The curtains were drawn, plunging the room into a twilight gloom, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. Daniel was lying in the center of the king-size bed, propped up by a mountain of pillows. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. His skin was the color of wet ash, and his eyes were closed, sunken deep into their sockets. Dr. Morrison was standing by the bedside. He was a tall man with perfectly coiffed silver hair, and a tan that looked like it came from a bottle. He was wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than my first truck. In his hand, he held a syringe. He looked up as I entered, and for a split second I saw a flash of annoyance cross his face before he smoothed it over with a practiced professional mask. "Ah, Walter," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We weren't expecting you back so soon. Please keep your voice down. The patient needs absolute rest." I ignored him. I walked straight to the side of the bed and looked down at my son. Daniel's chest was rising and falling in shallow, jerky rhythms. There was a sheen of cold sweat on his forehead. "What are you giving him?" I demanded, pointing at the syringe in Morrison's hand. Morrison sighed, as if he was explaining quantum physics to a toddler. He capped the needle and slipped it into his leather medical bag with a swift, fluid motion. It's just a mild sedative combined with a beta blocker. Walter. Daniel is suffering from acute chronic stress. His cortisol levels are through the roof. If we don't keep his heart rate down, he could have a stroke. We're just trying to help him sleep. Stress, I repeated. The word felt like a hot coal in my mouth. You call this stress? Look at him, Morrison. He's wasting away. He's lost 35 pounds in 2 months. His kidneys are failing. That's not stress. That's poisoning. Victoria stepped out from the shadows on the other side of the bed. She was wearing a white linen outfit that made her look like a nurse or an angel, but her eyes were cold, hard flint. Walter, please, she whispered, putting a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You're upsetting him. You know how much pressure he's been under with the firm. Dr. Morrison is the best specialist in the state. He's doing everything he can. She reached out to smooth Daniel's hair, and the gesture looked tender, but I saw the way her fingers dug slightly into his skin. It was a claim of ownership. I looked around the room. It didn't look like a bedroom anymore. It looked like a high-end hospice. There was an 4 drip stand next to the nightstand, hooked up to Daniel's arm. There were monitors humming softly, and on the small table near the door, there was a medical waste bin. I need a glass of water, I said abruptly, turning away from them. I walked over to the table near the door, pretending to reach for the pitcher of water, but my eyes were on the small yellow waste bin. The lid was slightly open. I blocked their view with my broad back and reached inside. My fingers brushed against cold plastic. I pulled out a small glass vial. It was empty. The label had been torn off, leaving only jagged white paper remnants, but there was still a tiny drop of liquid clinging to the rim. I brought it to my nose and inhaled sharply. The smell hit me instantly. It was faint, masked by the lavender spray, but was there. Bitter almonds. Sweet, sickeningly, chemically bitter almonds. I froze. I spent 23 years as a safety inspector for hazardous construction materials. I've taken OSHA certification courses on chemical exposure. I know what cyanide smells like. I know what heavy metals smell like when they oxidize. This wasn't sedative. This was a slow-acting toxin. It was probably a diluted solution, enough to weaken a heart muscle over time, to mimic natural failure, without killing the victim instantly. It was a weapon of a coward who wanted to play the grieving widow, not the murder suspect. I shoved the vial into my pocket, my hand trembling with rage. I turned back to face them, ready to scream, ready to call the police right then and there. But then Daniel stirred. He opened his eyes. They were glassy and unfocused, swimming in a drug-induced haze. He looked around the room until his gaze landed on me. "Dad," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. I rushed to his side, falling to my knees. "I'm here, son. I'm here. Listen to me, Daniel. We need to get you to a hospital. A real hospital. Now." Daniel shook his head slowly, a look of confusion and pain crossing his face. "No, Dad. No hospitals. Vicky says they'll just stress me out more. I'm fine. Just tired." He looked up at Victoria, and the look of adoration in his dying eyes broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "Vicky takes good care of me, Dad," he said, squeezing her hand. "She's an angel. You need to stop causing trouble." My breath hitched in my throat. "Trouble? Daniel, I'm trying to save your life," she told me. Daniel continued, his words slurring together. "She told me you're confused, that you're paranoid because of your stroke. Please, Dad, don't ruin this. Let me rest. She loves me." He closed his eyes again, exhausted by the effort of speaking. Victoria looked at me over his body. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her expression said everything. "See? He's mine. You can shout all you want, but he'll defend me until his last breath." Dr. Morrison stepped forward, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "I think it's time for you to leave the room, Walter," he said, his voice hard. "You're agitating the patient. If you continue, I'll have to recommend to social services that you're not fit to be in this environment." I stood up. I looked from the doctor to the wife to my dying son. I realized then that I had lost this battle. If I called 911 now, Victoria would show them the power of attorney. She would show them the medical charts Morrison had falsified. Daniel would tell the police that I was a senile old man bothering him. They would kick me out of the house, and I would never see him again. And then tonight or tomorrow, she would finish the job. I needed more than a smell. I needed more than a torn label. I needed undeniable proof. I needed to catch her in the act so clearly that even Daniel couldn't deny it. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to unclench. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "I'll go. I'm sorry, Daniel. I just worry about you." I walked to the door, not looking back. I felt Victoria's gaze burning into my back like a laser. As I stepped out into the hallway and closed the door behind me, I leaned against the wall, my legs shaking. I reached into my pocket and fingered the cold glass vial. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was just a sad, confused old man who had been put in his place. But they were wrong. I wasn't confused. I was focused. I pulled out my phone and looked at the date. Today was Thursday. Tomorrow, I had 24 hours. I wasn't going to call the police. Not yet. I was going to do something much more dangerous. I was going to play their game. I walked down the hall to my room. I needed to pack a bag. I needed to make them think I was leaving. I needed to make them feel safe, because a predator is most vulnerable when they think the prey has stopped fighting. I looked at the picture of Daniel on the hallway wall, a photo from his college graduation. He was smiling, his arm around my shoulder. "I promise you, son," I whispered, "I will not let you die in this house, even if I have to burn it down to get you out." I went into my room and shut the door. It was time to set the trap. Tell me in the comments, and if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. But what happened that night in the garage would change everything. The monster was about to show her true face. I packed my suitcase with the door open, making sure to make as much noise as possible. I threw my heavy work boots into the bottom of the bag with a loud thud. I rattled the hangers in the closet. I wanted Victoria to hear it. I wanted her to know that the old man was defeated, that her threat in the bedroom had worked, and that I was retreating with my tail between my legs, just like she planned. Dinner had been a silent affair. I ate quickly, keeping my eyes on my plate, avoiding Daniel's drug-clouded gaze. Victoria hummed to herself as she ate, looking more relaxed than she had in weeks. She even offered to make me a travel sandwich for my drive tomorrow. I declined. I told her I'd grab something on the road. I didn't trust anything that came out of her kitchen anymore. Now it was midnight. The house was dark. The only light in my room came from the street lamp outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. I was fully dressed under the covers, my hand resting on the heavy brass handle of my cane. I wasn't sleeping. I was waiting. I was waiting for her to come and finish me off. Part of me expected the door to creak open and see Victoria standing there with another syringe or pillow to smother me in my sleep. If she tried, I was ready. I had survived falling scaffolding in '91, and I wasn't going to be taken out by a yoga instructor in a silk robe. But when the doorknob finally turned, it turned slowly and hesitantly. It didn't click with the confidence of an assassin. It rattled softly with the trembling of a child. I sat up slowly, keeping my grip on the cane just in case. "Grandpa!" The whisper was so faint I almost missed it. "Sophie!" I breathed, letting go of the cane. "Come in, sweetheart." Quickly, the door pushed open just enough for a small frame to slip through. She was wearing her oversized pajamas and holding her old iPad to her chest like a shield. Her hair was messy and her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked terrified, but she also looked determined. She tiptoed across the room, avoiding the creaky floorboard near the dresser. She knew this house better than I did. She knew where the monsters lived. She climbed onto the edge of my bed, and I wrapped my arm around her. She was shivering. "Are you really leaving, Grandpa?" she asked, looking at my packed suitcase in the corner. "I have to make her think I'm leaving, Sophie," I whispered, stroking her hair. "It's a trick, like in the movies. The hero has to pretend to walk away, so the bad guy makes a mistake." She nodded, sniffing back a tear. "She's scary, Grandpa. She's not like other moms. I know. I said, my heart breaking for this little girl who had to grow up in a war zone disguised as a luxury villa. Tell me about the garage. Sophie, you said in your note you saw something. Sophie pulled her legs up to her chest. She spends hours down there. She says she's meditating the boat, but she never turns on the lights, and sometimes late at night when I'm getting water, I hear things. What kind of things? I asked. Humming, she said, like the big refrigerator in the supermarket. A low buzzing sound. It comes from the floor. I nodded. That confirmed what the banker told me. Centrifuges. Industrial cooling units. She was running power from the main grid, probably bypassing the meter, so the electric company wouldn't notice a spike. And there's something else, Sophie said, her voice dropping even lower. Whiskers. Whiskers. I asked. Mrs. Thompson's cat from next door, she whispered. He used to come into our garage, sometimes to catch mice. He was a big orange cat. Last week, I saw him run under the boat. The garage door was open and Mom was inside. I heard a noise like a hiss, and then she stopped, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the iPad. Then what, Sophie? Then Mom laughed, she said, a tear finally spilling over. She didn't sound like herself. She sounded mean. She said, curiosity killed the cat, little beast. And then I heard a thud like a heavy lid closing. Whiskers never came out. Grandpa. I watched for an hour. He never came out. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. A woman who could kill a neighbor's pet, without blinking, was capable of anything. It was a test run. Or maybe the cat had just seen too much. Sophie held up the iPad. The screen was cracked in the corner, a web of glass over the display. I recorded this, she said, 2 days ago. I was hiding in the pantry. She didn't know I was home from school yet. She tapped the screen, and a video began to play. The footage was shaky, filmed through the slats of the pantry door, but the image was clear enough. It was the kitchen. The morning sun was streaming in. Victoria was standing at the island counter. She wasn't wearing her usual pristine white clothes. She was wearing latex gloves. On the counter sat Daniel's favorite coffee mug, the one that said World's Best Dad. Next to it was a canister of protein powder, the expensive organic kind she insisted he drink every morning. But Victoria wasn't using the scoop from the canister. In the video, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag. She dipped a teaspoon into it and pulled out a heap of white crystalline powder. It sparkled under the kitchen lights. She dumped the powder into the coffee mug. Then she poured the hot coffee over it and stirred it vigorously. I watched Victoria's face on the video. She was humming. She looked bored. She was poisoning her husband with the casual indifference of someone adding sugar to tea. Then she stopped stirring. She held the mug up to the light, checking to make sure the powder had dissolved completely. She nodded to herself, peeling off the gloves and stuffing them into her pocket along with the empty plastic bag. The video ended with the sound of the front door opening and Sophie quickly lowering the camera. I stared at the black screen. That was it. That was a smoking gun. It wasn't just hearsay. It wasn't just a smell or a financial record. It was video evidence of premeditated attempted murder. I looked at Sophie. She was looking at me, waiting for me to tell her it was going to be okay. You're a brave girl, Sophie, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You're the bravest girl I know. You just saved your father's life. Can we show the police? She asked. We will, I promised. But not yet. If we show them this now, she might say it was just sugar or supplements. She might say you edited the video. We need the physical proof. I need to get what's under that boat. I took the iPad from her. May I borrow this? I need to make a copy. She nodded. I pulled out my phone and recorded the video from the screen, saving it to my encrypted cloud drive. Then I sent a copy to my lawyer's secure server. Now, even if she smashed the iPad, the evidence existed. Sophie, listen to me very carefully, I said, gripping her small shoulders. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to leave. I'm going to get in a taxi and I'm going to drive away. Panic flared in her eyes. No, Grandpa, you can't. I have to, I said firmly. It's part of the plan. I need her to think I'm gone. I need her to feel safe enough to open that hatch again. Because tomorrow is Friday, and I think Friday is the day she plans to finish this. Sophie's lip trembled. She's going to hurt Daddy tomorrow. Not if I'm watching, I said. I'm not going far. I'll be watching the house every second. And as soon as she makes her move, I'll be back. I promise you on my life, Sophie, I will not let anything happen to you or your dad. But tonight, I need you to go back to your room. I need you to lock your door. And tomorrow morning, I need you to pretend to be sad that I'm leaving. Can you do that for me? Can you be a spy one last time? Sophie took a deep breath. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her pajama top. She set her jaw, and for a moment she looked exactly like her father used to look before the world broke him. I can do it, Grandpa, she said. I'll cry. I'm good at crying lately. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. I smelled the strawberry shampoo in her hair, the innocence that Victoria was trying to steal from her. I love you, sweetheart, I whispered. Go now. Be silent as a mouse. She slid off the bed, grabbed her iPad, and crept back to the door. She looked back at me one last time, her hand on the knob. Get the monster, Grandpa, she whispered. I will, I said. She slipped out, and the door clicked shut. I sat there in the dark, listening to the silence of the house. The fear was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I looked at my suitcase. I looked at the cane leaning against the wall. Tomorrow, Walter Carson, the retired engineer, would leave this house. And tomorrow night, a different man would return. A man who knew how to dismantle structures. A man who knew how to bring the whole house down on top of the rats hiding in the basement. I lay back on the pillows, but I didn't close my eyes. I watched the shadows lengthen on the ceiling, counting down the hours until sunrise. The alliance was formed. The evidence was secured. The trap was set. Victoria thought she was a predator in this house. She thought she was the spider sitting in the center of her web. She had no idea that a wrecking ball was heading straight for her. I closed my eyes for a moment, visualizing the garage floor, the cut concrete, the epoxy seal. I was going to open it. I was going to expose the rot. And I was going to make sure that when the police finally arrived, they would find Victoria standing in the wreckage of her own lies with nowhere left to hide. The sun would be up in 4 hours. It was time to start the show. The next morning I left. I made a big show of it, hugging Sophie, thanking Victoria for her patience, shuffling to the waiting car with my suitcase. But I didn't go to the airport. I went to a hotel 3 blocks away, a tall building with a perfect view of the house. From my 10th floor window, I watched. I watched as a black van pulled into the driveway at 10:30. I watched as 2 men in gray coveralls unloaded crates marked with biohazard symbols. I watched as Victoria directed them into the garage, pointing at the sailboat. They were setting up the kill room. They thought they had all the time in the world. I made one phone call to an old friend, a man I'd helped 23 years ago when he was struggling, a man who now commanded the county SWAT team. John, I said, I'm calling in a favor. There's a kill room in my basement. My son is going to die in less than 18 hours. I have photos. I have proof. But I don't have time for a warrant. I need you to bring the team. Bring the battering ram. Come now. Silent approach. He was there in 20 minutes. When I walked back into that house at 2 a.m, slipping to the back door I'd wired to bypass the alarm, I found them, Victoria and Dr. Morrison in the bedroom, standing over Daniel with a syringe in hand. I didn't give them a chance to use it. I smashed the patio door. I triggered the alarm. And when Victoria came down with her gun, when she aimed at my chest, when she told me I should have stayed in Florida, Daniel stood up. My dying son, who could barely walk, stood between me and that gun. No, he said to his wife. You're not hurting my father. She pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the wall. And then the SWAT team came through the windows. The rest, as they say, is history. Victoria pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. She's serving for consecutive life sentences. The police found evidence of 3 other husbands, 3 other murders, 3 other fortunes. She was a professional predator, and my son was almost victim number 4. Daniel spent 6 weeks in the hospital, detoxing from the poisons in his system. It was touch and go for a while. His kidneys were damaged, his heart was weak, but he fought. For the first time in years, he had a reason to fight. I didn't go to Florida. I stayed right here. I took over the company temporarily, firing the board members who'd been complicit in Victoria's embezzlement. We didn't get all the money back, but we got enough. We got the house back. We got the company stabilized. And most importantly, we got justice. 1 year later, I'm standing by the grill, flipping steaks. The smell of charcoal and grilled corn fills the air, mixing with the fresh scent of the lake. The sun is setting, casting a golden path across the water. I take a sip of my beer and look down at the dock. Daniel is sitting there. He looks different now. He's gained 40 pounds. His skin is tanned and healthy. The dark circles under his eyes are gone, replaced by smile lines. He's holding a fishing rod, teaching Sophie how to cast. "Keep your wrists loose, sweetie," he's saying, his voice strong and clear, just like a pendulum, back and forth. "Now let it fly." Sophie casts a line. It lands with a soft plop in the water. She cheers, jumping up and down. Daniel laughs. It's a real laugh, deep and resonant, the laugh of a man who's free. I smile. The nightmare is finally over. I look at the boat tied to the end of the dock. We sold the Lady V. Or rather, we had it crushed. I couldn't bear to look at it. Instead, we bought a new boat, a modest pontoon boat, perfect for slow, lazy Sundays on the water. On the stern, in bold blue letters, I painted the name myself. The Survivor. It's not just a name for the boat. It's a name for us. For Daniel, who survived the poison. For Sophie, who survived the terror. And for me, who survived the doubt. I flip the steak onto a platter. Dinner's ready. I call out. They reel in their lines and walk up the grassy slope toward the patio. Daniel puts his arm around Sophie's shoulder, and she leans into him. They look like a team, a real family. As they approach, Daniel looks at me. He doesn't say anything, but he doesn't have to. The look in his eyes says it all. It's a look of gratitude, of love, and of respect. He knows what I did. He knows I broke the law, broke into a garage, nearly broke a man's arm to save him. He knows I burned down his world to save his life. And he's okay with that. We sit down at the table, the same table where a year ago we'd eaten a poisoned dinner in silence. Now it's covered in barbecue sauce, grilled corn, and laughter. I look at Sophie. She's eating a burger, getting ketchup on her nose. She looks happy. She looks like a child again. People always ask me if I regret it. If I regret the violence, the deception, the risk. They ask if a 73-year-old man should be fighting battles like this. I take a sip of my beer, and I tell them the truth. Regret is for people who fail. I didn't fail. I protected my pack. And if I had to do it all over again, if I had to break 1,000 windows and snap 1,000 arms, I would do it in a heartbeat, because that's what fathers do. We don't just build bridges. We stand on them, and we hold the line when the monsters come. My name is Walter Carson. I'm a retired engineer. I'm a grandfather. And I'm the man who took down the Black Widow. This is my family. And we're not just surviving. We're living. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had a fight for the people you love, share this with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to stand up for the truth. Until next time, stay safe, watch your back, and never underestimate an old man with a cane.